Today we come to consider the last of the 7 deadly sins, called sloth, or sometimes called acedia. And the truth is, it's the hardest of the sins to understand properly, really. Unlike the other capital sins, sloth is a sin of omission. It's a lack of something, a lack of desire or performance. So it doesn't have something positive that we're actually doing, but rather what we're not doing. The word sloth that we more commonly use is a translation of a Latin term, the Latin term acedia, which means without care, which is very interesting. Kind of giving up or not carelessness. And a kind of physical and spiritual expressions. So physically, acedia, sloth, is fundamentally stopping doing things, a cessation of motion and indifference to work. And so it's very close to laziness, really. Idleness, indolence, just not getting out of bed in the morning would be kind of a good example of that kind of sloth. Then spiritually, it's a bit more complicated, but they talk about spiritual sloth. And the Catechism says that spiritual sloth goes so far as to refuse the joy that comes from God and to be repelled by divine goodness. Now, you could say, what's the connection between the spiritual and the physical sloth? In both of them, there's a kind of fear of effort, just a kind of boredom, really, whether it's physical things or spiritual things. There's that phrase, love gives wings. So a person who's in love manages to do all kinds of things. Think of somebody who's trying to get the girl of his dreams. Well, he manages to do amazing things, heroic things, go through great efforts and dangers in order to obtain the object of his love. And so we have that nice expression, love gives wings. Well, in a way, sloth or acedia cuts wings. The person kind of cuts their own wings. They give into a lack of passion, a kind of boredom. They don't love. They're not moved. They're not enthusiastic in the kind of way that the lover is enthusiastic. They really want to do nothing. No work, no prayer. And in fact, the motto of the slothful person is probably, it's just too much work. It's just too much effort. A famous Jesuit priest, Father John Hardin, he defined sloth in this way. It's kind of good. He said, it's a sluggishness of soul or boredom because of the exertion necessary for the performance of a good work. The good work may be a corporal task, such as walking, or a mental exercise, such as writing, or a spiritual duty, such as prayer. So in the same is that I just don't want to make the effort. Refusal to make the effort, whether it's a physical thing, as he says, a mental thing, or a spiritual thing. And in fact, what we tend to do with these things is we run away from them, the effort. And we want to be literally diverted away from the thing that requires an effort. And that's where we get the word diversion. Entertainment is diversion because you're diverted, steered off the path or towards something. Now, obviously, times diversion is a good thing. You go on your holidays and a bit of diversion. But we are hooked on diversion. In fact, there's 3 books that I've come across about this with almost the same title. Amusing Ourselves to Death, probably the most famous of them. Entertaining ourselves to death, and distracting ourselves to death. All the same idea. And we all have that experience. The time to get down to work. It's time to start a job that I just don't really relish the thought of getting into. And suddenly I find that I have to check the weather, check the news, check the sports scores, feed the dog, watch some YouTube videos, spend a lot of time perhaps, scrolling on Instagram. And that is just classic sloth. Or again, I may realize it's time to take care of my soul, to pray, to receive the sacraments. And there, we have other ways of diverting ourselves, but even with work. Oh, I'm too busy, really, because the prospect of starting to pray is just too much for me. So I can even start doing the work that I couldn't do before. Anything to avoid doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that is the essence of sloth, the failure to fulfill one's basic duties, physical, mental, spiritual. How do we fight this? Since all of us are affected by this, we'd have to say. And we're all affected. The very first thing in the morning, what's the very first thing that affects 99.9% of people is the sloth of, I don't want to get out of bed. Just don't want to make that effort. We know we have to. Eventually we will. But sloth hits us. So how do we fight it? Well, I would say in a word, one thing, timetable. There's a little passage, a small paragraph from Saint Josemaria Escriva, which puts it very well. He says, penance is fulfilling exactly the timetable you have fixed for yourself, even though your body resists, or your mind tries to avoid it by dreaming up useless fantasies. Penance is getting up on time, and also not leaving for later, without any real reason, that particular job that you find harder or most difficult to do. And we might add a line to that. Penance is not looking at Instagram or YouTube or Twitter when you should actually be doing something else. So timetable, fulfill the timetable. This is the time for me to get up. This might be a time for me for entertainment. That's part of our timetable. Great. Now it's the afternoon. It's time for me to get down to work. No, not time for YouTube. Time for me to get down to work, etc., etc. Time for me to pray. Time for me to go to Mass. Timetable. So in a word, timetable defeats sloth. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.